All right, up next, I want to look at Minuet in G. This is by Bach. Now, Bach is so much fun to analyze because he likes to take us on little twists and turns all over the place. So we're probably going to go out of the key for at least a minute. And there might be other surprises in here. We'll see. So first, as always, let's listen. So Minuet in G, you've heard this before. I'm pretty sure you've heard this before. If not, enjoy it. It's a cute little piece. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So let's look at what we know right on the surface. First of all, these repeats and this first ending, second ending business, if that's new to you, if you haven't seen that before, we talked about this in some length in my first music theory class, which is, I think it's labeled as basically like how to read notes, but we also talk about just kind of how to read a piece of music, and we talk a lot about how this works. So go back and review that if that tripped you up, how the first ending and second ending works and these repeat signs work. Okay, what else do we know? Now from the title, we can tell that it's probably in G. Okay, that's a good clue. He called it in G. Maybe that's worth mentioning that titles of pieces don't always tell us something about the analysis of the piece. Much more common in classical music of the 17th, 18th centuries, they put titles that said something about the piece, like Minuet in G tells us what kind of piece it is. It's a minuet, and what key it's in. It's in G. But as you get into the 19th and 20th centuries, composers started putting much more, let's say, fluffy titles on pieces. So the titles of more modern music don't often tell us anything about the piece. But in this case, it does. So in G, it's probably in G, and it is a minuet. A minuet does tell us a little bit about the piece, but for our purposes, let's just say that it means a short, kind of light piece. That's typically in an A-A-B-B form, meaning this is the A section up to here. So A, and then we hear A again, and then the B section is here, and we hear B again. So A-A-B-B. More on form in the future. Okay, so let's zoom in. Now this, unlike the last one, this is not strictly repeating. And we've got a lot more non-chord tones. We've got non-chord tones in the bass, which can confuse us even more. So this is going to be a bit more involved. We've also got some accidentals that we're going to have to deal with, some out-of-key notes. So we might have to break this analysis into two videos, but we'll see. Let's just dive in. So looking at our key signature, we can confirm that it is in fact in G, because we have one sharp. And remember, the rule is take the sharp, go up a half step, and that's your key. So this is an F sharp. So G is our key. So all Fs are sharp. Okay, so let's just dive in and look at this first line. So we're in the key of G. So let's start with the most likely thing to happen is that our first chord is going to be tonic, a 1. So let's see if that's true. We have a G in the bass, so that's a pretty good indicator. We have a D above. So the notes of a G major chord, let me just jump over here. This is still left over from our last piece that we analyzed. Let's change this key to the key of G. And let's just outline our chords here. So here's our 1 chord. Our 2 chord, it's going to look like that. Our 3 chord, it's going to be a B minor. Oops. Our 4 chord, it's going to be a C major. Our 5 chord, it's going to be a D major. Our 6 chord, it's going to be an E minor. Our 7th chord, it's going to be an F sharp diminished. And then our tonic again, our 1 chord again at the top. Okay, now let's just keep that open so we can use that for reference. So our G chord, our 1 chord, G, B, and D. So looking here, we have G and D. So we don't have the 3rd, but that's okay. This is in the chord, that's good. Not in the chord, but remember, we could very easily call that a non-chord tone. Let's come back to that in a second. Here's a B and a C. So the notes in this bar that are in the chord are this one, and this one. So we're in the time of 3/4. So deciding what's a strong beat and a weak beat is a little trickier here. But our G bass note goes all the way to here. And then we have a new bass note. So that could change the way we see things. So let's call strong beats in 3/4 all our down beats, really. So 1 is the strongest beat, and then 2 and 3. The and of 2 is definitely a weak beat, and the and of 3 is definitely a weak beat. So I'm pretty comfortable calling this whole bar G a 1 chord with this A and C being non-chord tones. Also, we have a non-chord tone in the bass, and that's okay. That's totally allowed. It's walking up by step. So G, A, B. So I think I'm pretty comfortable calling this note a non-chord tone too. We would call that a passing tone because it's just moving in between these 2 tones. It's just a step along the way, and that's okay. So I'm happy to call this whole bar a 1 chord. Let's look at our next chord. We have a B, a D, and a G. Now, interesting here, because let's just run on the assumption that our bass note is telling us what chord it is, okay? If this was a B, a chord built on B, let's go over to our little worksheet here. B, D, and F sharp is what we would expect, right? So we have a B, D, and a G, and we have a G on beat 2 and beat 3. This G is taking up a majority of the measure, right? So that's probably not right, because we would expect an F sharp if this was a B. Let's see if we can find something else that works. If this was not the root, do we have a chord that all of these notes work in? We do. What if G was the root? If G was the root, we would need a B, which we have down here, and then we would need a D. So this whole bar fits in, no non-chord tones, to the key of G. Let's go over here to the chord of G, which is our 1 chord again. So we're still on a 1 chord, right? Awesome. So still one chord. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, now we have a C. Let's just start under the assumption that this is going to be a C major chord. So if it was a C major chord, what we would need, it would be a 4 chord, because the fourth one, we would need an E and a G. So we have a C, an E, that's good. Another C, that's good. A D is not in a C chord. An E is, though, and the F is not. Remember, these are weak beats. C is in the bass. Pretty comfortable calling this a 4 chord for the whole bar. Okay? Moving on, back to this B, which is familiar from right here. So since we called that a 1 chord, let's see if 1 chord fits here. 1 chord would be G. I need a B and a D. Here's a G. Here's a B down here. Then I don't have a D, but I have another G, so I still have no non-chord tones here. So that means this is pretty comfortably a 1 chord. Let's go on to the next one. Here I have an A. Okay, what would A be? If the root was A, that would be a 2 chord. It would be a minor chord, and we'd need a C and an E. Let's see what we've got. A, C, that's very good. Non-chord tone, and a D. C, B would be a non-chord tone, and A. So our non-chord tones here would be D and B. Now that's a little suspect because those are on fairly strong beats. Is there anything else that works? So if this was, if these were chord tones, we'd have a B and a D, and we'd need an F to complete that, which we don't have at all. And we would need a G to complete that, which we don't have at all. So I'm pretty happy to call this an A chord because we have this A in the bass. We have non-chord tones on relatively strong beats, but we don't have anything that completes these 2 notes as a chord. So pretty safe to call this an A chord, which would be another 2. Okay, now we're back to a G. Is this a 1 chord? G, B, and D is what we would expect. Here's G and B. Non-chord tone, another B, non-chord tone, and chord tone. So similar situation here. We have the non-chord tones on kind of strong beats. Not as strong as the downbeat, though, which is right here. And we have this bass line. So I'm going to call that a 1 chord. Okay, let's go to the last bar of this system. And now we have 3 bass notes, and that might tell us we have 3 different chords here, but let's find out. The D and an F. So let's look over here. If the root was D, that would be a 5 chord, and F is in it. So D, F, and A is what we would expect. So D, F, and now we have a B and a G, and that looks to me awfully like a separate chord. So if we called that a D and an F, that would be a 5 chord. And now we called this a B, and I have a G and an A. What could that be? One of those notes is probably not on chord tone. Does it make sense that it would be a B? It was a G and an A? There's no G or A in this B chord. What about if we use the G? Now I have a G and a B, so can we call that a non-chord tone? I think we can. It's on a weak beat, so B and G. And now here we have a G and a B, so the same thing but upside down, right? Now this B is up here, this G is down here, and then another G. So here's what that tells me. This could be a 5, and then this could be something based around B and G, probably a G, pretty comfortable calling that a 1. So 5 on just this beat and then 1 for the rest of the bar.